Alright, well, today we're going to be looking at my Battlegrounds healing cheese setup. Oh, wait, don't look at that. Alright, everyone, welcome to my Stamina Warden Bash build. First thing I wanted to mention before I jump into the build itself is I did remove all of my CP here, so none of those passives, none of the stars are slotted. So that way we can kind of look at the build in the sense that it's going to be used for Battlegrounds, and then later on I'll add back in the CP, and we can see what we might potentially use there. To begin with, let's buff up. And that puts us at 35.7 health, almost 25k stam, under 13k mag, 3358 weapon spell damage, just around 34k resistances, stam recovery 1640, and mag recovery 1150. Got that in just in time. So, running a good amount of health and a good amount of resistances when we're buffed. So that's pretty easy to maintain. So it's going to make us very tanky, of course. And we have good self-healing in this setup. So that is important as well. Recovery is right at where I'm really comfortable with it. So, I mean, it could be a little bit higher, but I do find myself using potions, not necessarily on cooldown, but fairly frequently. So, other people may prefer to have a little bit more sustain. Others may feel more comfortable with less than what I run. That really just depends on the player. The damage seems kind of low initially, but again, because it's a bash build, there's things that are happening in the build itself that are that's buffing our bash damage that wouldn't necessarily show up on a character sheet like this. So we'll get to that in a moment. We are using the Lever Mundus, which boosts our penetration to just over 7k. When we combine that with Major and Minor Breach, that puts us at around 16k effective penetration, so that's a decent number to be at. We're using Jewels of Misrule, of course, and this will probably be the best option unless you actually wanted to go ahead and dive in and use the Orzorga's Bear Haunch. That would be a slightly more expensive and slightly better option, but only marginally so. We are a Wood Elf in this setup. I think Wood Elf works best for what I'm trying to do here. I think Argonian would be a next best choice because of the potion passive, gives you some additional sustain through that means. One of the key things I like Wood Elf for is it does have a sustain passive that we can make use of. And it also has a little bit of extra penetration, has a little bit extra speed, and 2k stamina built in as well. So I think it's a very well-rounded race for this build particularly. And Imperial should still be very good on this as well with the cost reductions that it provides. That makes up for the lack of a sustain buff or a recovery buff. I think Dark Elf and Orc would be fine. You just have to make sure you're managing your stam recovery appropriately in those setups. My health goal was 35k in this setup. You saw I had 35,700, so I could probably dial back what I've got into health right now, but I did put 14 points into health and the other 50 in the stamina. You can tinker with that if you want. I think 35k is a sweet spot here, which allows us to have enough damage without, and we still have good tankiness regardless. I mean, we could try to push that to 40k, but I think we wouldn't have enough damage at that point, either through the amount of stamina that we have or otherwise. So that's kind of where I wanted it to be, basically, in this setup. As far as the gear, pretty standard 5-piece bonuses for a bash build. Deadlands Demolisher, which buffs our bash attack damage and also gives us a proc when we bash 5k physical damage and a cone in front of us every 2 seconds, interrupting any enemy's hit. Our other set is Veiled Heritance, which the 5-piece there gives us 500 weapon and spell damage for 15 seconds when we interrupt an enemy, and our bash attacks do an extra 500 damage. We have a 1-piece of Magma Incarnate for mag and stam recovery. If you don't have that, then you could use a... We'll talk about replacements later on. I don't want to talk about replacements just yet. I'm just going over the build. Monster set, or not monster set, Mythic we're using Gaze of Sithis. Main stars here are the max health that it provides and the armor that it provides. Health recovery is whatever. We are reducing our block mitigation to 0, but we are tanky enough and we have enough good healing in the setup that unless we're getting Zerg, we should be pretty okay. Jewelry is all infused with bash enchants. So with infused, this is purple, because if you want to gold out jewelry, you're more than welcome to. I was not prepared to spend that kind of money on this build. But 750 extra damage to bash attacks. Gold glyphs would probably push this up to, I think it's 799 is what it comes out to be, because of the weird rounding that Zos does. Should be 800, but it's whatever. Divines on these 4 pieces, the smaller pieces. Reinforced on chests and legs, and infused on the helm. We could also do either reinforced on the helm or divines. I thought the extra health would be useful. Health enchants on the 3 big pieces and the pauldron. Stamina enchants on the other pieces. Overall, 5 heavy, 1 medium right here, bracers, and 1 light sash here. Could do 7 medium, because there's one of the heavy armor passives is that we do get extra bash damage by having additional heavy armor, but 2 heavy armor, it basically equates to 60 extra damage with bash. I think it's much more useful to get the full Undaunted bonus with the 6% health mag and stam that we get from there. So that's really up to you. I think 511 heavy is the way to go here, though. So with the sword and shield, or in this case dagger and shield, what I've done is I split the 2 5-piece bonuses so that when I flip to the back bar, we still have 4 pieces of both sets. The reason for that is we don't need either a 5-piece bonus on our back bar, so that still gives us the maximum benefit of both the sets when we're not on our main bar, when we're not on our damage bar. When we go to our back bar, we still have 4 pieces of each set. So kind of optimizing the buffs that we're getting from our armor and our gear. And I happen to choose a dagger because I found a cheap sharpened Veiled Heritage dagger in a Guild Trader. It doesn't have to be a dagger. With a sword and shield, or one-handed shield, the type of one-handed weapon doesn't make a difference. So whatever you find is useful. It's good. I am using Escapist Poisons. These give us Unstoppable. This one does 2.4 seconds, stuns our opponent, and gives us Immovable for that duration. And it also has a stamina drain attached to it, increasing the cost of the target's stamina abilities, and also restoring stamina to us for 3.5 seconds. There's another variation I use in a lot of my builds, which is just the Unstoppable bonus, which basically it's given us 4.4 seconds of immovability every 10 seconds, that, assuming the procs and cooldown. Which is good uptime for immovability. My main potion I'm using in this setup is the Tri-Stat potions, so I think that is best here because of I think the extra magic we get from the potion is important for our mag sustain, and it's nice to get the stamina. If you really wanted to, you could use heroism potions, mag, stam, and heroism. That would be the best option there, because we still get our mag and stam back. Health we can recover through using those pools, and we get our heroism. That means we can cast our ultimates a little bit more frequently. So that's another option there, but again, a very expensive option that I wouldn't necessarily recommend. I'm perfectly happy with my tripods, actually, but we'll talk about that in a second. Back bar, I'm using Vadishran Greatsword. This is a Nirnhone because I'm not entirely positive, but it should buff our proc damage from Frenzied Momentum. Although if we switch bars, it may not copy the back bar damage. It may just adjust to whatever we have on the front bar, which will be a slightly less amount. This is not going to kill anything necessarily, but it's another component of our damage. It's a way we can build in some damage from our back bar set that we can actually use while we're on our front bar, and that's kind of the great thing about Battlegrounds 200 anyway. We cast it on our back bar with momentum, but then once we get 5 or more stacks, we can proc it on our front bar using a medium weave, basically. So that would be a good option. We'll talk, like I said, we'll talk about some substitutions we can make in a bit. For skills, front bar, I'm using Heroic Slash. That gives us our minor heroism buff, since I'm not using the heroism pots. It also debuffs our enemies' damage by 5%. Shielded Assault, because we don't have a ton of speed built into this setup, other than having Bird of Prey and the 5% from Wood Elf. In order to stay on target, I think having a gap closer is important, and it's proved to be important, I think, from my clips that you've hopefully seen already. We also get a damage shield from this, which once it's fully buffed, we're going to get about a 5.5k damage shield off of this, which is also very helpful. Then our main spammable is Power Slam. This is being buffed by all of our bash buffs that we're getting from gear and enchants, so it does count as a bash attack, so it's getting those same buffs. And we're also weaving that with light attacks and actual bashes as well. So there's that. Bird of Prey, standard. Resolving Vigor, standard. Dawnbreaker, Smiting, standard. I find myself using this front bar ultimate more than anything else, by far. There's an options for back bar ultimate we'll talk about, but right now I have Northern Storm slotted there, which is an option when you have. If you're going in with the group, like group v group, like small group versus small group, then Northern Storm might be a preferable option. But I think, you know, running around just by ourselves, we really need the burst from Dawnbreaker if we're going to actually secure kills in some cases. Ice Fortress, standard. We have Deep Fissure slotted on the back bar because didn't have room on the front bar, but actually I kind of like it back here because it does have that 9-second duration with the 2 shock attacks that it does, that we can kick it off on our back bar and then flip over to our front bar and start doing our damage. Rally for the heal, stamina recovery, and the proc for Frenzied Momentum. I'm using Polar Wind here. I don't need any more stuns in this setup, so I feel like that's better than Arctic Blast. Plus it is healing more than Arctic Blast, because not only is the initial heal higher, it also gives us a hot on top of that, scaling off for max health. That's another argument for running 35k health versus 30 or 32, which we otherwise run a lot of the time. And it not only heals ourselves, it also heals one other person, so it is nice in group play that we can provide healing for our allies. Also Bullnetch for the stamina sustain, and the every 5 seconds it does remove a negative effect. So that's our skills. Just for replacements, first of all, for gear replacements, if you didn't want to run Vadishran Greatsword, you could run 2-piece Potentates or 2-piece Endurance. I think both of those are good options. The reason I suggest Endurance is because that would push our tooltip for Polar Wind a little bit higher with the additional health that the Endurance set provides at 2 pieces. Could also do 2 Trainee, but I think the health for a 2-piece Endurance is higher than what Trainee gives us. Anyway, Potentates, like I said, another good option for back bar. And if we didn't use Vadishran Greatsword, then we're not really tied to Greatsword. If you wanted to use a Resto Staff instead, that is another option for a back bar. And also another way to manage your mag sustain, because you can then heavy attack with the Resto to increase your magic pool. If you didn't want to use Gaze of Sithis, or if you didn't have access to Gaze of Sithis, then another mythic we could use is I think Markin is the best option, but Malakath is an interesting alternative because our critical is so low. We're not really worried about getting critical hits in this setup anyway. So if we use Malakath, we would further buff our damage. Without really risking the downside of Malakath, which is that it reduces our critical damage and healing. So I think that's an interesting alternative that we could use here, that we don't really get to use in a lot of other builds, because a lot of builds are crit focused, a little bit more crit focused nowadays. We would lose I think I would use Malakath in the situation where we had a healer, maybe not necessarily a dedicated healer, but at least a part-time healer present in the group, because that would make things a little bit more tricky, I think. Anyway, if we just didn't have any access to mythics, then either a 2-piece Magma Incarnate would be fine, or could do 2 Bloodspawn. I think that would be great here. Even 2 Balorg would be okay. I don't think we need a whole lot of extra penetration though, so maybe not Balorg. But yeah. What else were we doing? For skill replacements, if we choose not to go with Vatishan, then we wouldn't need Rally here. We could instead put either... I think Shimmering Shield would probably be a better option than Crystallized Slab. That's up to you. But right now I have it morphed to Slab, but it's easily changed. We could also use either morph of Living Vines, either Living Trellis or Leeching Vines, whichever you prefer. I think that would also be a good substitution there if we were not using Vatishan. Also, if you didn't want to worry about using Northern Storm, we could put a healing ult there, Healing Thicket, or if we happen to be using Resto Backbar, then Life Giver is another option right there if we have it unlocked and leveled. If we happen to be using Heroism Potions, then we wouldn't need Heroic Slash, and instead we could slot Growing Swarm there instead, which does better damage. It's a bleed damage, and it could also spread to adjacent enemies, and it also does a minor vulnerability, which increases their damage taken. So that's an option there as well. I would not change Dawnbreaker by any means. We're going to need that burst damage from our ultimate to pair with the burst damage from Deep Fissure, and then on top of that we have our bash damage, which is really sealing the deal. So, alright, and then finally, champion points if we choose to take this into Cyrodiil. I have actually played this in Cyrodiil. And it's good as part of like a small group when you're fighting other groups of similar size. We're not going to take down ball groups, we're not going to take down faction Zergs, but it's still fun in the right scenario. And again, we have options here as well. For green, I like to have Gatherer and Harvest on there so I can farm mats between battlegrounds. Rationer is useful because we can eat food outside of a battleground and get the full buff of that, so we don't have to use quite as much food in the long run. Steed's Blessing is useful for the movement speed. And if we do go into Cyrodiil, then I might replace these first two with either Liquid Efficiency, Gifted Rider, and or War Mount, whichever ones we prefer. I would probably go with Liquid Efficiency and Gifted Rider. War Mount's fine if you don't have your stamina leveled on your horse, then maybe you need War Mount, but otherwise I would go with the other two. So, for blue, Biting Aura, Master at Arms. We've got Endless Endurance slotted, but we could easily change that to Deadly Aim, and then Cleansing Revival. Biting Aura buffs our Deep Fissure and our Dawnbreaker damage, which is our big burst, and AoE. Master at Arms and Deadly Aim would buff our single target damage, our bashes, our gap closer, whatever those do, but all those damage would be buffed. So Deadly Aim or Endless Endurance, whichever one you want to do there. Cleansing Revival is basically a purge. Again, we could use Foresight. That's an option. Could use Occult Overload. I don't know what kind of status effects we're putting out in this build. A lot of it's physical damage. We're still probably putting out some status effects, but yeah. For red, Celerity or Celerity, however you say that, of course. Survival Instincts. Bash is considered a core combat skill, so if we are affected by a status effect, that reduces our bash cost by 25%. So that's actually a very useful one for the setup. Sustained by Suffering, of course, almost always, 99% of the time if we're in combat, we're going to have a negative effect present on us. So Sustained by Suffering is essential for that recovery. Rejuvenation, this is kind of our flex spot. If you didn't want to use Rejuvenation, we could get more health from Balanced Vitality. Slippery is an option if you want to mess around with that, or one of these other ones with either Unchained or Peace of Mind, Hardened. There's other options there. So Juggernaut would be a good one. There's only a few passives that affect bash builds. Bashing Brutality is one. 120 increased damage, and Savage Defense reduces the cost by 90. Not major by any means, but if you want to go ahead and unlock those passes, and you have the ability to unlock those passes, I would recommend just putting those points in there just to buff it as best we can. So, alright, I think that's all I have for this setup. If you do have any questions, let me know in the comments. Hopefully you enjoyed this and found it interesting or helpful. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourselves. Have a good day. Bye.